Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. It's Jeremy Werner and Joey Wagner. And if you didn't get enough Illinois football during our Big Ten Media Days podcast with Josh Whitman, Seth Coleman, Gabe Ackus, and Pat Bryant, well, today we got Bret Bielema on the podcast, Joey. And it's always great to get the Illinois football coach on. And we just chatted with him. And as always, he's always interesting. And we're happy he gave us a little bit of time heading into a huge fourth season for the program and where the trajectory is. So it was great catching up with him.
Yeah, he's always really transparent with us, which is appreciated. We wanted to get it honestly at media days, and the schedule was tough. And I'm glad we did it like this. Gave us some time to digest kind of what we heard, what we saw at media days. Just gave a little bit. Feel like you were less up against the clock time with him. So it's fun. I appreciate Bret. Yeah, it's a big year. It's a big year for this program and to return to that postseason.
All right. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here's Bret Bielema, Illini head coach on the Illini Inquirer podcast. Always great to have Illini football coach Bret Bielema join us here on the podcast. Bret, how are you? Getting all your media responsibilities out of the way, man.
Yeah, it was, you know what? It's always going to be a different flavor every year, but I thought, this is something I've really enjoyed going over to Indy. I get a car ride over with our guys the day before, and then they added a photo shoot that night. I think our guys really enjoyed that. The three guys we went, I thought handled themselves awesome. Just to kind of see those guys in that light really kind of warms my heart as a coach. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Before we dive into training camp, which is always an exciting time of year for everybody, Bret, I want to ask you a little bit about the offseason. And Jerry Kill, who I know you know really well, once told me that the most important hire he can make in a program is the strength coach because he spends more time with the players than anyone. So I want to ask you about Tank Wright. How has he impacted your program? And what was gained in this offseason with Tank?
You know what? I couldn't echo that thought anymore, especially in today's world, right? As this world of roster development really goes on 24/7, 365 days a year. So what our guys come in and accomplish during the summer, especially some of these guys are on shorter windows, right? So, when Jerry was talking about it, even, back in 2006 when I became the head coach, the part that was evident then is you had your guys in place for the most part, other than the additional freshmen, your majority of your roster was in place. Ready for the summer, but now you got guys that are literally coming in for the first time ever in your program when the coaches aren't even here, right? Like we had guys join us in June and July where you literally can't touch them as assistant coaches in the way that the strength coaches can. So Tank's ability to affect our roster, to work with them, many times some of these transfers, their first impressions of the University of Illinois football program is through Tank and his staff. So his value is at a high price tag. I thought he, had probably the best summer he's ever had since I've been with him. This is our fourth year together as a head coach. I've known him for a long time back when he's an assistant at Arkansas with me. But his daily impact is something that's never short notice on our staff.
And speaking of transfers, Bret, the first couple of years, you obviously have used the transfer portal. I mean, 2 quarterbacks that have made a huge impact on your program, 3 actually, with Paddock in there as well. And I think of the depth guys you've added that have maybe really been huge for you, Denzel Daxon, Clayton Bush, guys like that. But this offseason did feel a little bit different. I mean, you were in some high-profile transfer battles. Joey and I have done the kind of exercise of how many transfers could start for this team, and some of these guys could be your best players. So was the approach this offseason any different with the transfer portal? Is it what your roster necessitated, or do you have a different approach to the portal moving forward?
Yeah, twofold. I think once we've been able to kind of get our hands on guys in this portal world earlier, it allows us to get in on better players. And I really think I give Pat Hamilton and his staff a lot of credit. We started pre-working the portal in a variety of different ways, guys that we know that might be getting in, guys that already declared in, guys that had initiated through other people that they may be jumping in, right? So we had a foundation of what we could get into. And then, a guy like T. Brooks, I know you guys have talked to him. I mean, we got on him pretty quick as soon as his name surfaced. We actually talked to him, as I mentioned, in media day for a while before he even started talking to people, just because he wanted to stay involved with his academic progress there at the end of the semester. So we talked to his dad and his mom. But every case is a little bit unique. I do think we knew some specific needs. I think the portal world, even though I don't want to label it that, I think people think it's the wrong context, but free agency is just, you have to require certain players at certain positions you need. Maybe the outside world doesn't know that, but we do. And then I think a combination of our coaches, our recruiting, our personnel staff, the NIL world, and what we've been able to make our guys generate a short window of time with us and into the NFL, no better example, Isaiah Adams, even though he wasn't a true portal, he's a guy that gained us literally with maybe one or two other offers. 2 years later, he's a third-round pick. The Arizona Cardinals worth about $10 million. So that stuff pays off in its own regard as well.
Bret, you guys obviously know who's leaving your program, whether it's graduation or maybe you have an inkling on transfers. But when does this portal when does it really hit high gear that like we've got to attack these particular positions?
Yeah, Joey, I wish I knew the answer to that question. You hit the nail on the head. Like everybody thinks we know. Like I know this. There's a group of guys in our program going this fall that are guaranteed this year is their last year of eligibility. Right? Injuries can happen and some waivers, but for the most part, X amount of guys are out at the end of this year, right? That gives you a quantitative number that we kind of build our high school recruiting number off of. But then that next window are guys that maybe we gain either as expected or unexpected, right? Like guys that jump in the portal that we knew might do that, or guys that we'd had conversations with, or there's the other one where guys get in the portal that we had no idea we're getting in, right? I think there's some X factors always that go into that, but to have that true number, and now to be honestly, Joey, this is a time in unprecedented times. 2025 class, we don't know right now actually what the number of scholarships that we're going to be able to give out is at. We know it can be a minimum of 85, but we don't know what the maximum number is going to be, and that leads a lot of gray into this recruiting class that we're currently in. It's not like we're talking about 26, 27. We're talking about 2025. And another thing I'd like to get out there, and I mean this with all due respect, the NCAA, the Big Ten, everybody's done a great job of foreshadowing getting us. But one of the true travesties of this 25 class that's going to happen, this class is going to sign on Wednesday, December 4th, right? This is going to be a new signing period that's never been done because of the way the calendar has been written and because of the way it will finish. This is the first class in NCAA history that I'm aware of in the modern era. The head coach will never be in their home. Right? We have guys that are committed to us now and guys that will sign with us before December, before the window opens up in January where we can go out again. These guys will sign. Every player in our 2025 class that signs in December, I will never be in their home. And I can tell you as a head coach, I have used that home visit in so many years, in so many different ways of getting to know a player on a different level that benefits their time and their development. Not only in their moments of triumph, but more in their moments of adversity, because I've been in that home and I know how it works, right? So that's something I hope we get however we want to say it rectified in a short fashion, because that's one that we can't live with.
So how do you handle that uncertainty of not knowing if it's 85 or 105? It's Friday afternoon. I'm sure the House settlement will come in at some point in the next couple hours. But how have you handled that uncertainty?
Well, it's a little bit of a planning ahead, and we've always, you guys followed us close enough. If I got 85 scholarship players, you can tell by the way I signed, I was probably signing with a number of 88 to 90, knowing that I was going to lose 4 to 5 guys. I think that's the way you've always kind of how to operate. Like, what the end line number is, and then you kind of, as a coach, forecast what you think you can do, right? But now, it's like maybe we go plus 10. Right? Because we may be at 90, we may be at 95, right? Like, and you don't want to shortchange yourself. There's some players now that I know if we made an offer, if we pushed hard, we would get them to commit. But I also don't know if that's the number I want to land at, knowing what might be out there for us, 6 months from now.
Bret, I want to talk about this team now. Offensively, you clearly have made strides, and I don't know why, but you kind of get this reputation as an old school coach, like ground and pound it kind of guy. But I remember your offenses at Wisconsin put up big numbers. Your offenses here have thrown the ball well the last couple of years. Barry obviously was a switch in what you do offensively, and that's worked out with some progress. How do you think your offense has evolved, and what's kind of the next steps for that group?
I think the number one thing I always look for, Jeremy, without a doubt, is production, right? Even though the methodologies may not be the same, if you as a football team can average running the ball 200 yards and throwing 200, you're going to win a bunch of games. Now, if you even get to the 150, 250 balance, you're going to win a lot of games as well. So I think that's been the middle ground for us. You guys obviously very well documented last year, the setbacks we had, I think were a direct result early in the year, especially of not being able to run the ball, right? And I'll never forget Russell Wilson, who might be the most talented QB signal caller I've ever had, right? He made reference to me after about his third or fourth game into the season with us. He's like, Coach, because we run the ball so well, it makes throwing the ball that much easier, right? Because people have to tip their alignments, tip their reads, tip their assignments, and one hand washes the other, however you want to say it. But I think balance is going to be the key.
Defensively, you've talked about the conversations you have to have after a season doesn't go the way you had hoped it would go. What's that evaluation process like with you and Aaron and your new staff members, obviously, that can have input on this? And I know you're not going to give away anything to Eastern Illinois or Kansas or anything like that, but what kind of changes or differences can that evaluation make?
Well, I think, exactly what you said. Like, anytime you have something that wasn't where you want it to be, things got to change, right? And I think a thorough evaluation. Now, obviously, there's a certain thing that comes in when you lose talent, you bring in talent, the numbers, injuries. I mean, it all plays a part of it, right? But I think overall, glaringly, we need to be better, in certain scenarios, whether it be end of half, reduction of big runs, big passes, being able to execute at the end of game scenarios, being a little bit more efficient and defensive red zone opportunities. So there were a variety of things, but also, like you said, we added 3 new coaches on the defense side of the ball, right? So 3 new guys, 3 different experiences, 3 different skill sets. They came into the room. I added Myers Hendrickson here the last week or two that, is a guy that's been an offensive coach his entire career. To have him in that room and have him foreshadow what's coming at us offensively, as well as what an opponent might be doing that week of our game plan is really going to help us. So, and then just overall from the accumulation of Tank and his staff to our coaches we brought in the room, the roster development of our defensive roster hopefully is going to be at a higher level than ever before.
Brett, obviously, you mentioned Terrence Brooks. It was a really big addition for you guys. Torrey Cox as well. Then you get Matthew Bailey back, Xavier Scott back. Like, what can that kind of a young group a year ago, and you've added some experience, what can that secondary be for you guys this year?
Well, hopefully a little bit of what we need, right? Like I like the athleticism, the speed. They're all very coachable. They're really, really sound fundamental guys that believe in it and understand it. I also think, for the guys that were here a year ago, they're a little frustrated, that they view if the outside world views them taking a step back, right? So I think they got a chip on their shoulder. I always say here at Illinois, we don't know how to play with one chip on our shoulder. We got to play with 2, right? And I think these guys carry that. I'm going to tell you a little X factor too, man. Tyler Strain, right? Like, he's a guy that, over the first couple of years that we've been here, I know, it's been a little bit of high and low and a little bit of everything in between, but he is really focused. He's had an incredible summer, just his weight, his body, his maintenance. I'm really excited for T Strain to hit the field this fall as well.
That's a good segue to where I wanted to go, Brett. Give us a player or two that fans are going to need to or will learn about this season that maybe have been more rotation guys who could be stepping into a bigger role.
Yeah, on defense, without a doubt, I think the portals that you're talking about, I think Dennis Briggs is a very prominent player, played at Florida State. I know I talked to a coach early on at Florida State, and they felt not this past year, the year before, they thought Dennis might have been their best defensive lineman on the roster. Had some injuries last year that caught him a little bit. Up front, General Hunt as well. But I think a guy that I'm excited to see, T-Raw Edwards, just has made an incredible jump. Didn't get on the field all that much last year, but really excited. On the outside perimeter, of course, you got Gabe, you got Seth, you got Alec Bryant, but Daniel Brown is a newcomer that was very impressive in spring drills, just a very good athletic player. The inside backer room, if I had one guy that I've been kind of, waiting to see exactly what happens, without a doubt, Kanena came along. He got banged up, injured, Dylan Rosiak, but I think I'm expecting James Cruz to get added into the mix here, and I just think he brings a lot to the table. Excited to see him hit the field and see. And the other guy is Malachi Hood. He's fine and cleared. He's, if you talk to our strength coaches, I think they'd tell you Malachi is one of the most impressive guy in summer workouts and drills. And he just really hasn't been on the field for us in the first 2 years he's been here. So those guys, I think, we've talked a lot about the secondary. I am excited to see Sabor Kareem, see exactly where he is. Had a pretty good spring, changed position to the safety position. We'll see how that plays out. Mac Rossetich, again, continue to come along and develop. On offense, there's no doubt in my mind. I think, up front, our 2 tackles that we factored and brought in, J.C. Davis and Melvin Priestley. Those guys have been very impressive. 2 roster additions through the portal, but I would say Zy Chrysler, Josh Geske, Hunter Whiteneck, Josh Kreutz, those guys all had really, really good springs. Desmond Schuster, who was in a year ago but didn't play last year. At the tight end position, Tanner Arkin is playing as good a football as he's ever played. Cole Rusk, I'm excited to see exactly where it's at. And Henry Boyer is back off of injured shoulder a year ago, been 100%. And then, on the perimeter, I really like what I'm hearing. Pat Bryan, Hank Beatty, to a certain level, have kind of been in my ear about the development of the wide receiver room that I think is going to be exciting. Kanari Wilcher, who had the spring, Rio Sanders, who I'm excited, very productive player a year ago in junior college football. Both Donovan and Luke Altmaier have been talking about those guys and the way they produced. And then I think a collective group that I can't wait to see out there that our fans have seen a little bit of is our whole running back room. Excited to see where Josh McCray, Caden Fagan, Aiden Lawfrey, where exactly those guys are. Jordan Anderson is nursing a hamstring, but I'm excited to see him come in. And Khalil Valentine, I can't wait to see him hit the grass.
Bret, do you have? I know you're a good storyteller. So do you have a story from the offseason that has you bullish about where your team is at and how they've grown since last year?
I think this group, going down to that last game, we had the one play, right, to remain bowl eligible, and to be cut short in a way. And that last game, the way it kind of unfolded, has sat in their mental drain, right, or their appetite to get better when needed. Tank has talked about this group really attacking every workout for what it is. I think this is a hungry group who left the field last year dissatisfied, and we've added some new guys that are also. You get in the portal because you're hungry to do better, right? So I think that combination of those two things has really got me excited. I think the little conversations, to your point, Jeremy, the little conversations I've heard from the weight room, the training room, the equipment room, the academic building, my staff, right, about how hungry this group is to be successful, that's probably got me more excited. Joe Keith, who runs our facility here in the building, we were working on a project together in my office, and he literally said to me, he said, Coach, I don't know football, I don't know coaching, but I know this building. And he said, your guys are in this building more than at any point in my career, just all hours of the day, whether it's a Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Our guys love being in this building and working on getting them better on football.
I know everyone's focused on the new Big Ten, but I wanted to ask you about the new rules, Bret. There's a lot of them with the technology on the sidelines, the 2-minute warning. Analysts can coach, and I know you're bulking that up right now. Everyone thinks they can use these to advantage. How do you make them an advantage?
Well, it's one thing to have them; it's another thing to use them, right? Like I think a lot of people in this world, it's a buy world, right? Go to the grocery store, go to the whatever specialized store, and hey, I'm going to buy this, and my life's instantly better, right? I know this. When I was a golfer, I used to buy a new driver every year, and I was still getting the same results, right? Like it's one thing to have the tool; it's another thing to use it. So what we're focusing in, right? Joe Maggio has done an unbelievable job going back to the spring game. We use technology in the spring game. What I found out afterwards, that literally probably only about half the country only didn't even use them for the spring game, let alone let their players. So we'll maximize that, get good at it. Our players love watching film. The key is now you can use that not only in game, but in halftime, which I think is a huge, huge learning opportunity for guys, right? The coach to player, right? It's obviously been around in the NFL for a long time, but there's a learning curve there that both coaches and players got to get good at. So between Barry and Aaron talking with our players, it's not just a habit, it's how to maximize it, right? And then I think probably the one that probably, you mentioned it a little bit, Jeremy, the 2-minute warning. Everybody's just thinking, oh, there's an automatic timeout at 2 minutes. No, ruh-roh, like this is a game changer, right? Like for what you do with the game and how you end of half, end of game, it's something that's been studied and really mastered in the NFL for a long time. So to have that information and use it as a resource is a big deal.
Obviously, Bret, training camp is a lot of battles, right? It's a lot of jockeying for position. So what one or two position battles are you kind of most interested in seeing shake out here in camp?
As a head coach, everybody focuses on the pretty boys, quarterback, and in the premier positions. But I'm really excited to see who completes our what I call our travel roster, right? So we have a roster of 120 players. That 120-man roster gets designated down to about 74 players every week for game week. Whether you're traveling on the road and taking 74, or you're in a hotel here at home, we only take 74 players. Who's going to complete that 70-man roster, right? So we'll get on paper our offensive, defensive, and specialists, and the people that are going to start games. But it's really about that second string guy who's going to play as a starter, or it's that third string guy who's going to play a valuable role in a sub package, right? So I'm excited to see the depth of our tight end room. I'm excited to see the depth of our defensive line room. I'm excited to see who's going to be able to make plays and create negative yard plays out of the outside backer room. And really in the back end, who's going to be able to cover and sustain those things. So I think, some specific things that people on the outside world won't be looking at, but like our top 3 corners, right? Who are our top 3 or 4 safeties? Who are our top 3 defensive linemen, but backed up by the next group of 3 guys, right? Like who's going to give us valuable depth in the offensive line is usually, in the NFL, they usually only they only dress 7 players, maybe 8 O-linemen on Sundays in the NFL, right? It's because that's the only guys that really play, right? So who are those 7 to 8 offensive linemen in our program who are going to be the bulk of our reps this fall? Those are the things I really like to focus on.
All right, Brett, we're going to talk football for 5 months with you. So let's have a little fun. You want to do some rapid fire before we let you out of here?
Absolutely. You guys are good at this.
All right. First of all, your go-to artist or podcast that you listen to if you're on a plane or have a couple minutes to listen?
Illini Inquirer Podcast, without a doubt. Like, just hands down.
Turned it off right away. That's what that was.
You want to hear the honest to God truth, right? Now, you're talking to a guy here. I have never clicked on and watched a podcast in my life that I may watch the ones I'm on, but I've never watched anybody else. I might get a clip or something somebody sends me, but I've never watched a podcast. And I'm sitting here as a 54-year-old man. I've never watched anything ever in my life on Netflix, not once. So like I don't know what that means. I watch TV. My wife and I were going to click on CSI Miami back in the day. Now she's a big below deck. I watch things that require me, because my job is so detailed. I want to watch things that don't make me think.
Yeah. No, my dad's a farmer. He is the exact same way. I don't want to think. I don't want to feel that much, except for just get me through it. I want to ask you this one. When do you normally get to work and when do you normally leave? I think people would find this probably insane.
In season, right? Well, so in fall camp, right? Our first staff meeting every morning is at 7 a.m. going into fall camp. I'm usually in the building 2 hours before that, right? Like whatever that navigation is, right? Like that's just that. I always laugh when I get in my car. You know how everybody has memory in their vehicle that says home, right? Or work, right? Like you punch the button. In my car, my car thinks home is work, and my home is actually flipped, right? So when I push it, when I push the address for work, it's actually home. And when I push my address for home, it's actually work, because it gauges your hours, I'm assuming, to designate what it is. So yeah, we live a little upside down world.
All right, last one. We'll get you out of here. Funniest player you've ever coached?
Funniest player I've ever coached, hands down, probably it's a guy that was a defensive lineman, Patrick Buttram. He actually lives up in Chicago. I just saw him when we were up at the Cubs game. He had an unbelievable dry sense of humor. He's a D lineman out of Milwaukee. His dad was a 7-footer, was a center at the University of Milwaukee Marquette when they won a national championship back in the day. But Patrick had an unbelievable Jim Rome impersonation that he would break out at any given time. That was classic, priceless. So I think that one stands out just because he would do that rendition. I would see it, but we got a cast of characters. You guys know this, man. Like I'm blown away when I'm sitting on a bus or an airplane or traveling with our team, and I see some of those personalities, because guys are different around me, right? Like they're a little bit more reserved, but I would tell you that one of the most enjoyable parts of our job is obviously winning games, but to get to know these guys and be a part of their lives and find out their personalities. And sometimes you guys find that out sooner than we do, just because they truly turn into themselves when they're not around us.
Yeah, no, I echo that. These stories and who they are is awesome. Speaking of your schedule, you got to get out here. But Brett, we really appreciate your time.
I appreciate your time, gentlemen. Appreciate it very much.
All right, Joey, what stood out to you about Bret Bielema and what he had to say about this program? Because I do think he has real optimism about next year, despite what they've lost, despite having a disappointing season, because I feel like he thinks he can change those margins. The margins were so small in some of those games last year, but I feel like he thinks this roster has just more options. Maybe they don't have Johnny Newton or a Devin Witherspoon, but I think he likes the depth of this roster a lot more.
Yeah, I think he does. I think you want to look defensively, because that's been a big conversation this offseason, right? It wasn't a very good defensive year for them last season. Last season, it was hey, this team is so loaded up front, and hey, the secondary is pretty young. It might be thin. That's a question mark for us. And now I do have some question marks up front, but I feel like it's less like heavily skewed front end to back end, if that makes sense. Like, you don't need the secondary to be 2022, and you don't need the defensive front to be what everyone thought it was going to be last year. Obviously, you want those positions to be good, and you want those positions to complement one another. But it felt like last year it was very, very heavy up front and questions in the back. And I feel like maybe you'll disagree, Jeremy. I feel like there's less of that now, given the transfer portal additions.
No, absolutely. Like the defensive backfield, I mean, on paper should be the most improved group, right? Because Terrence Brooks is a talent upgrade. He's just a significant upgrade. Torrey Scott's a depth and experience upgrade. But then you always have to bake in that Xavier Scott was really good last year. He should be better. Miles Scott was a solid starter, needs to make more plays, but now he's got a year of experience and should get better. And Bielema continues to hype up Tyler Strain, that he should take a step forward too. And that's a guy that got really his most significant playing experience last year. And you had growing pains, just as you did with Luke Altmaier in his first year as a starter. You had growing pains with some of those guys, and you just hope they improve. Like, it is not stagnant that those guys are the same as they were last year. And then, of course, to add Matthew Bailey, who they thought was going to be their best player in the secondary last year. So all of that leads to that group should be better, but they need to be better because you don't have Johnny Newton, you don't have Keith Randolph, but they do feel like Dennis Briggs is going to be a high impact player. He keeps talking about T-Raw Edwards taking a significant step forward. I don't get concerned with nose tackle given Terrence Jameson's history of it, but Gentle Hunt, Alex Bray, those guys got to be good. And Illinois hit on those evaluations there. So I understand some question marks, but there is stuff on that roster. Dylan Rosiak should be better. Kenena Odaluga, James Kreutz should be better. So that back seven especially should be better.
Yeah, I think there's so much in acquisition, right? And acquisitions can take a program. And I think you and I are of the belief that some of the high-end acquisitions, J.C. Davis, Terrence Brooks, Zachary Franklin, are worth a win and a half for this team. But I think in the portal era, in kind of where we are right now, sometimes you overlook just natural development. And we don't know that, right? Like, we don't know that natural development until it's Saturday at 1:00 and we're seeing Sabor Kareem or Mac Rusetich or Sidney or Matthew Bailey, same person, really. Like, we don't know that until we see that. It's like, it's kind of hard to remind yourself to leave some room for that. And I understand if people would say, yeah, well, they're young. I'm not, but like, that is part of college football. It's why everyone loves the sport, and transfer portal people get so, because you like to watch that development of a guy. But like, that's what gets a little overlooked. And I understand it's like, until it happens on Saturday, it's just hype coming from a building. And like, it's just kind of a weird balance there.
Well, and that's what this program has to be, right? Like, yes, they can add these transfers, but Bret Bielema has talked about being a development program. Last year, it didn't work out. Like, maybe they bet too much on internal development and did not add enough high profile transfers. That's why I find this interesting, this season so interesting, because you did add those high profile transfers because you needed to upgrade your talent, but you also need to continue to develop your roster. And one thing Bielema has done really well at is retain his roster, to keep a Pat Bryant, to keep a Gabe Backus and Seth Coleman. Those type of players is significantly important. And then you hope as they become upperclassmen, and that's what Bret Bielema's recruiting classes are starting to do, is they're becoming redshirt sophomores or juniors or, all of that. So that's why that part of the piece of the season should not go overlooked. Josh Kreutz, Josh Geske are part of that, right? Brandon Henderson in his second season could be a significant part of that offensive line. We talk about the wide receivers outside of Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin, all of that internal development. If you can hit on some of those guys, like a Caden Fagan becomes a star, that changes how you feel about this team.
Yeah, I want to talk about what you mentioned, because it's something that I guess as you were talking, I was thinking about more, and we've acknowledged it, but maybe not paid as much attention to it, or brought it up, I should say, as much as we should. And I'm not saying it'll never happen at Illinois, but they haven't lost those all-conference guys to big paydays somewhere else. And let's be honest, Jeremy, for a couple of years, we spent a lot of time, and everyone spent a lot of time talking about Illinois' NIL. And boy, Illinois, like every other school, can use more. And, You saw what I would presume to be an uptick this spring with some of the guys they brought in, but it's also been there for them to not lose a Johnny Newton. Like, don't fool yourself. Johnny Newton had opportunities to go play in a league that wasn't the Big Ten and at a school that wasn't Illinois. Like, Seth Coleman gave back his
home. Yes.
Yeah, like all these guys have had opportunities. I'm not saying Illinois is never going to lose one of these guys because like that's foolish. It's college football that happens, but it's not to this point. And I think like that is worth mentioning and looking at it and seeing the belief that these high-end stars, these NFL bound guys or guys with NFL potential feel in that program. And it feels like you're carrying water a little bit saying that, right? But it's just a reality. Like they've not bolted for other options.
No, because I think of Purdue. Purdue's done well getting guys in the portal, but they've also lost some key guys. So Nick Skirton going to Texas A&M is a really tough loss for them, given how great he was under Kevin Kane and Ryan Walters last year. So Illinois hasn't had those kind of losses yet to this point. So I think that speaks to one, they have invested in those players, but also the relationships they have with those. Now you hope it pays off with this season. Yeah, the rules part of this I find really interesting. And I think Bret Bielema's time in the NFL is really key here because he's played with a 2-minute warning. He's played with technology on the sidelines, right? So he has a better idea of how to use it. Like when you bring up the in headset, right, for the quarterback or the linebacker or safety, he knows that you have 15 seconds. So you can't just waste your time. You have to get that play in 15 seconds. Otherwise you could cut off midway through. So do you have a backup plan? You got to make sure your coordinators know that they have to get that play in quickly and have it ready for the guy with the headset on. So those things I think help when you had a head coach who's been there before.
I also thought we haven't talked about this. We haven't really talked on here since media day when we did more interviews. Bret was asked about that at media day. I thought he brought in a really good point that some teams will wait until 15 seconds to get their call in so the other side of the ball can't react because the mic just stops. Like it's shuts right off. You can't hear, you can't communicate. Like, again, it's a preparation. And Bret Bielema is not the only person in college football who knows how to handle that. But you start talking to those guys about this in the summer months and in fall camp. And maybe you run some stuff in fall camp where it's like, okay, this call's coming in late. What do you do? Like, it's just ways you can kind of put yourself in position to think about things maybe you wouldn't have otherwise thought about, or just get those guys thinking in a little bit of a different way. And I do want to bring up the other rule change. The analysts can be on-field coaches now, and I think that's a big deal. I think Bret Bielema, you saw him add 2 former head coaches earlier this week. I would imagine some more guys will be announced over the course of the next 24, 48 hours. But to get more people coaching kids playing football, young men playing football is a better way to put it. Like, that's helpful, right? It's not just helpful at Illinois. It's going to be helpful everywhere. And Bret's got a pretty good library of people to reach out to, and I think you might see that start to take shape here.
All right, you asked him, players that Illinois fans should know more about. Was Malachi Hood the name that surprised you the most? No?
Yeah. Yep. Special teams feels like something for that. Like, 'cause that's the thing with Bret. Like, we got to acknowledge with Bret Bielema, he and special teams is a core part of the football game, right? But like, he's going to start throwing special teams out there that you immediately think like, okay, at linebacker, and maybe Malachi Hood is, but I'm thinking special teams could be an area maybe too where you would see his impact.
But I'll mention this. If they have an injury at linebacker, he's the third guy, right? Like it's Dylan Rosiak, Kaneno DeLuga, James Kreutz, and then it's probably Malachi Hood or JoJo Hayden. And if he's mentioned Hood, I'm going to guess he's there. Like Easton Baker, I think, is a freshman who could play on special teams right away. He's coming off an injury. So most freshmen, I'm not going to put a huge expectation on. We'll see with that. But yeah, I think special teams and maybe is the fourth linebacker who by week 6 you might need to have, right? So
well, it's worth noting sorry, I always cut you off. He was a defensive back in high school. So he's kind of got that hybrid skill set that I'm curious if they tried to tap into in certain sub packages. Now that you mentioned his name a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. He talked about the battles. Like some coaches, we got competition everywhere. I love that he focused on the line of scrimmage because those are the most interesting to me because offensive line, you need more competition. I think Priestley's probably going to start at right tackle, but you need competition for that 6th spot, that 7th spot, that 8th spot, because you didn't have those guys last year that you could rely on. Bret keeps talking about how he feels better about the top 10 on his offensive line than he has at any point. Now, maybe he had a better starting 5 with what he inherited here or his second year here, but they definitely feel like they have an actual Big Ten 2 deep now, which we saw last year really hurt you.
Yeah, look, last year when that Kansas game happened, it was a scramble, right? It was a scramble to reshuffle that offensive line, and you're pulling Isaiah Adams in the spot. You didn't want him to move. Like they didn't hide it. They wanted Pearl and Adams on their left side, start to finish. And they had to pivot to that because the right side got so shaky. If Priestley doesn't work, you can try a Brandon Henderson. Or he mentioned, I think Hunter Whiteneck probably is better suited at guard, but you could try a Hunter Whiteneck. Like there are options. I don't know. I'm not saying they've got all conference guys sitting on the bench. That's foolish, but I think there's just more choices. I mean, yeah, they had maybe more top end, quote unquote, talent earlier in Bret Bielema's tenure with the Doug Kramer and Verdarian Lowe and Alex Palczewski. And really Alex Pihlstrom you could throw in that conversation. But then there was like, who's your fifth guy? Who's your fifth? Who's your other starting guard? Who's your center? They moved Alex Pihlstrom. He did a great job, but that wasn't an ideal move, right? I don't think anyone would say that. And it turned out really, really well. Now you start looking a little bit. It's the evolution of a program. It's the evolution of a program that really puts an emphasis in the trenches like Bret Bielema always has. We'll see how it plays out, but you're right. There's a notable, and I felt it in the spring talking with Bart Miller, there's a notable just kind of breathe a little bit knowing you've got options. And that's the best thing you could possibly have as a football coach.
The one thing I don't want to overlook with this offense is they got to run the football better. And one of the reasons they didn't was the offensive line wasn't quite good enough. I think especially when it comes to running the ball on the interior at times last year. But I do think they've gotten stronger there with Zy Chrysler staying at right guard. I thought Geske got a lot better late in the season. Krutz got better as the season went along. I'm really excited about Priestley as a run blocker. But the running backs didn't stay healthy. But we saw when Caden Fagan was healthy, Joey, they ran the ball. They had balance. So were they ninth in the Big Ten in rushing yards per game? That was 40 yards less than the year before of what they averaged with Chase Brown when everyone knew they were going to run the ball, basically. If Fagan can be that guy, and McCray and Lawfrey are going to add to that, but if they can get back up to that 170, 175 rushing yards per game, I feel confident Luke Altmaier and Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin and all those guys can get to about 200 yards per game. But they got to be able to run the ball to make it easier for the rest of this offense to throw the ball. And I was happy he talked about that because that is where they took a step back last year. I thought mostly due to personnel and injuries, but that's where they have a lot of way for growth. And to be honest with you, that's where they struggled in the red zone. That's where they struggled with short yardage situations. But Fagan changed that for about 3 weeks, and then he got hurt.
Are you going to go to the first game? Like, you can take a wagon to the first game? You're all in. Huh?
We saw it. We saw it against.
I don't disagree with you.
We saw it against good teams. And listen, I know McCray's going to get a chance. Fagan's your workhorse. Like, he is the potential all Big Ten player there. I'm excited about what Lawfrey can do as a compliment to Caden Fagan, but I think he's on a team that's looking for playmakers. Like, we know Bryant and Franklin will be two of those. Fagan showed he could be a Big Ten playmaker. And as you point out the stat, like his first 70 carries were for positive yards. Like, they had troubles with that when the other running backs were in the game. Fagan gets you positive yards.
That's right. And one more plug on the position primers we did, a month earlier this month. That was Bret Bielema's statistically least productive running back room of his career. And it was kind of by a decent margin. And again, you pointed out the reasons. The offensive line wasn't good enough, consistent enough, especially early. Injuries. Fagan really puts up some numbers, I think, if he plays those last 2 games. And maybe things are different for Illinois when you have that guy back there. It's a big recruiting win for a reason. And
I think you beat Iowa with Fagan.
I mean, Northwestern. I don't want to take that away either. We're talking very small margins here. We got 5 things to watch from training camp, which by the way begins on Monday. They're going to do some night practices, given the rash of night games coming up to begin the season. But who's Illinois' big playmaker this year? Right, 2021. It was Chase Brown and Isaiah Williams. Maybe more Chase Brown at that moment than Isaiah Williams. 22, obviously Chase Brown. 23. Williams and Casey Washington at the end. Who steps into that, Jeremy? That's a big question I have, because you need guys who can change a game. You need guys who can take over and break one to put you in a better position. And Caden Fagan's one of those guys who I would watch. Pat Bryant's one of those guys who I would watch.
And if you're pessimistic on Illinois, part of it's talent. So you need your most talented players to make a huge impact. Caden Fagan's one of your most talented players. He's 6'3", 250. I'm guessing he runs a close to a 4.6, right? He's explosive. He's strong. He's a 4-star recruit. Like this is the type of guy that you need to make a big impact. Now, Aiden Lawfrey was a big recruiting win, so it's time for him, and he had a really strong spring. So I'm really excited to see those guys get going. Anything else stand out about Bret? What he had to say?
No, I do want to touch on, because I thought it was interesting. We're recording this on a Friday afternoon. The House settlement should really be more, I guess, in stone. A lot of really solid reporting has come out. It sounds like the roster limit number is going to be 105 for football. There's a lot of confusion around that. And there's been a lot of, that starts for the 25 class. That's not a kick it down the road to 26 where you've got more time. And just kind of watching Illinois, watching other programs in the country try to navigate that is difficult for them right now. And maybe, I'm sure they all know at this point 105 is the number and you can go with that. But that's an interesting wrinkle in the 25 class. I also thought it was interesting. I didn't piece this together in my brain, Jeremy, with National Signing Day moving up, that Bret Bielema, he seemed kind of, we've heard about his home visit stories and the ability to know a kid's uncle who didn't come with them on the OV or whatever the case is. Like, they're not going to be in people's homes, in 25 recruits' homes. That's tough.
I do understand why signing day is early December.
6th, I think.
Yeah, it's because you want that done so that you can focus on the transfer portal the next 2 months. Right? That is why they are doing it, because coaches were complaining, I have a signing class, plus I have a transfer portal. So maybe moving the dates of when the coaches can go visit. Can they go visit homes in the summer or something like that? But then your summer schedule is even crazier. Can they go visit them in May? Like, get rid of that Saban rule? I don't know. So maybe they need to figure that out. But I do understand they're trying to put more time so you can just focus on transfers and not have to worry continually about recruiting the commits you already have. So I understand that, but this is probably something that they didn't think about that someone like Bret thinks about.
Yeah, Bret does think about a lot of things. Like there's a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have thought about the home visits. I wouldn't have thought about all right, put your play in at 12 seconds instead of 16, so the other team can't communicate. Like he thinks about a lot of that stuff, and that's kind of a look in the life of college coaches, right? Like how much or how many different things you've got to kind of cycle through just in stuff that like is a press release for a lot of things, right? Like, hey, in helmet communication, rah, and then people move on. But like there's more to it. I think it's just kind of a reminder of that from time to time, that there's a lot on these guys' plates.
All right, before we get out of here, we were at Big Ten Media Days for the first day when Illinois was there. Anything stand out to you? I did think that was interesting when Tony Petitti was asked about what he looks for in adding a program. He didn't just say, hey, we're not worried about that right now. He said, well, football. Like, football is most important. I do think they need to be an AAU program. I think that's important to the Big Ten chancellors and presidents. So I think strong academics and strong football. So Miami fits that. Florida fits that. I think Stanford maybe would, but Florida State, Clemson are the ones that are trying to get out of the ACC. So it'll be fascinating, Joey, to see all that. But it was weird seeing UCLA's logo next to Rutgers or Oregon's next to Penn State's. It's still got to sink in. Once they start playing the games, maybe it'll feel a little more normal. But Lincoln Riley stepping up to the podium, I saw him in the underbelly of the stadium. I was like, oh yeah, Lincoln Riley's here. He's got that Cliff Kingsbury feel to him. So I know it wasn't a great start for Deshaun Foster, and I think he's got a really huge mountain in front of him heading to the Big Ten. But Oregon, I feel like, is going to roll. So I don't know where it's going, Joey, where we end with this in 10 years, but we ain't done yet.
No, probably not. Every time I think there's time to breathe, there's something else that happens. I did think it was interesting that the Big Ten football championships are staying in Indianapolis for the next 4 years. That is, well, I don't know what happens after that. I would assume maybe there's some westward interest in that, but keeping that footprint in the Midwest is, I thought maybe it'd be 2 years, right? Then they'd revisit, but 4 year, which maybe means for us, selfishly, media day, if probably want to have it where you're going to have the championship game that year, right?
Yeah, keep it in Indy. That's a very good spot to be. I will never complain about something going to Vegas. I bet basketball will be in Vegas quicker than some of these other ones. But I think eventually football will probably end, especially if like Oregon and USC are able to compete for Big Ten championships, are in those games. I can see that, but it would be really weird if down the line, like Penn State and Michigan are playing in Vegas for the Big Ten championship. I guess not that it matters that much, but for the fans, they'll probably still want to go to Vegas. It'll cost a lot more money to do so, but it will be weird if something like that happens.
Well, if you're going to the Big Ten championship game, usually you've got some money tucked away for that anyway. So you should make it a Vegas weekend and just win it all back, right? That's how you do it in Vegas. Known gambler.
Yeah. No, I just go to the pool, get some drinks. That's my Vegas. Try to put as much sunscreen on as possible and survive through the night. Yeah, I got to put extra on that, Joey. Definitely. Any last thoughts here? Any lingering thoughts?
Just ready for training camp. We'll start talking to some coaches on Monday. Then it's off and running, man. It's summer's over, right? Big Ten Media Day means summer's over.
Yeah, and we should have put Brett's feet to the fire. It's like, hey, we're going to be actually be able to see any of training camp, and I think the answer is mostly no.
Yeah, that should have been our rapid fire. That should have been our last rapid fire. Like, not even are we going to. Why? Why? Tell us why. We can't. I know why. And I know people are tired of hearing us complain about it. This is what it is, right?
Stop us, Joey. It won't stop us from complaining about it. I just like being able to see a little bit of one-on-ones, seeing these guys compete, because then you get to know the team a little bit more. So we're just kind of reliant on what we see in 15 minutes of stretching, and then obviously what the coaches tell us and what we can kind of read from some of that stuff. I think we do a pretty good job of figuring that out through the coaches. The coaches are all available to us, so we get to learn a lot about them. And we got 2 coordinators that are really, really good with us. All the assistants that we talk to are really, really good. So we do get to know more about this team, but it's not like Lovie Smith or Tim Beckman around Zook camp where it's like, hey, this guy had a great day. This guy had a great day. The battle here is interesting. Here's your one-on-ones. We just don't get as much of that color, which I think creates excitement. So it's a missed opportunity there, but ultimately, you win games, people will be excited.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll also say before we get out of here, like our experience with the new coaches in the spring, I think there's a lot of personality there. There's a lot of really helpful stuff you can gather through conversations if you're asking the right questions to those guys. So that's if I'm looking for a silver lining to not being able to see anything, it's that. But obviously, the preference would be to be there and taking notes and watching.
All right. Thank you to Bret Bielema for joining us on the podcast. We appreciate his time and kind of went over with us. So we appreciate him giving us his time today. Hope you guys enjoyed that. For Joey Wagner, I'm Jeremy Werner. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer Podcast.